Chapter 10, on rights, or incorporeal wealth. 1. We have now to consider that gigantic mass of property which exists only in the form of mere abstract rights, which is called incorporeal property, or incorporeal wealth, which is the third order of economic quantities. These are mere abstract rights to something which will only come into possession at a future time. But as these rights may be bought and sold, and their value may be measured in money like that of any material chattel, they are included under the terms pecunia, res, bona, merx, in Roman law, under that of goods and chattels and vendible commodities in English law, and that of wealth in economics. The explanation of the theory of the value of land which we have given in Chapter 4 will make the nature of these rights readily intelligible. The land is an economic quantity producing a series of profits in the future, and each of these future profits has a present value. But every other profitable business whatever in a similar manner produces a continuous series of future profits, and every one of these future profits has a present value. And these rights receive different names, according to the source from which the profits spring. We have already considered the value of the land, and also the theory of credit, which deals with the profits arising out of the industry of men. 2. Incorporeal property is of two kinds, each of them comprehending many varieties and enormous masses of property. 1. Where the right of one person to demand a future payment is connected with the duty of someone else to make the payment. The right and the duty constitute a nexus or obligation. This species of property may be called rights of obligation. It is also called an annuity, which is the right to demand a series of payments from some person. This species of incorporeal property includes credit, which is the lowest form of an annuity, being usually the right to a single payment. Rents of houses, lands, copyrights, patents, mines, wires, frames, and sea, which are usually a limited series of payments, up to property in land. The funds, tithes, and sea, which are the rights to receive payments forever. 2. Where the right only exists to receive some uncertain profit, but no particular person is bound to make that payment, and there is only the expectation that someone will. This is called the emptio spe, or the emptio resprate, in Roman law. This species of property may be called rights of expectation. To this class of property belong shares in commercial companies, copyrights, patents, the goodwill of a business, the practice of a professional man, tolls, ferries, fisheries, shootings, and sea. In modern times incorporeal property includes by far the largest amount of existing property. On rights of obligation. 3. The doctrine of annuities is a curious commentary upon the arguments of Aristotle, Dante, and the medieval theologians that interest for money is unnatural and abominable. The theory of annuities entirely depends upon the principle that money naturally produces interest, and that interest also produces interest, an idea that drove Plutarch wild. An annuity is the right to receive a series of payments, from whatever source arising, and the doctrine of annuities rests entirely on the principle that each of these future payments has a present value, and that the right to all or any number of them may be bought and sold like any article of commerce. The present value of an annuity is, therefore, the sum of the series of the present values of all the future payments. Now let us consider a perpetual annuity, or the right to receive a series of payments at definite intervals forever. If money bore no interest, it is clear that the value of such future payment would be exactly equal to the payment itself. Consequently the present value of such an annuity would be the same as the aggregate of the sums to be paid forever. Therefore to purchase such an annuity it would be necessary to pay down an infinite sum of money, a consequence which is manifestly absurd. Hence such a mode of calculating the value of an annuity is evidently erroneous. Again, suppose that simple interest is charged, then each future payment is diminished by a small definite sum of uniform amount. And it is evident that to buy an annuity on such a principle would involve exactly the same absurdity as in the former case. That is, to secure a finite annual payment it would be necessary to pay down an infinite sum. And this shows that this mode of calculation is also erroneous. But if we suppose that compound interest is charged, we shall find that each term of the series will progressively and rapidly diminish. A larger quantity will have to be subtracted from each term in succession, according as the payment is more distant. We shall thus obtain a series of quantities in geometrical progression. the common ratio being a fraction, and by the laws of algebra we know that such a series, even though infinite, has a finite limit. Each term to be added is smaller than the preceding one, until at last they diminish too, and that finite limit is the present value of the infinite annuity. Hence we see that the present value of an annuity must always be calculated at compound interest to produce a rational result. The present value of each term or future payment is such a sum as, improved at compound interest at a given rail, would amount to the sum in the given time. And the present value of the whole annuity is the sum of the series of present values of each term. It is clear that compound interest is natural and proper, because if a sum of money produces interest, it makes no difference whether it is called principal or interest, and as soon as interest has accrued from the capital, that interest as naturally produces interest as the capital did. If the doctrines of so many poets, philosophers, and divines had been followed in practice, it would have been impossible to have bought landed property, but nature herself refutes their folly, for if seed corn be planted in the ground it naturally increases in a geometrical ratio, and if a person lends another money to buy the seed corn, it is natural that he should receive a proportionate share of the profit made by the use of his money. As a sum of money is always equal to a perpetual annuity, we have 100 liters equals a perpetual annuity of 3 liters, or 100 liters equals an annuity of 10 liters. For a certain number of years. As these quantities are equal to each other, we may either pay down a capital sum to buy an annuity, or pay an annuity to buy the right to a capital sum payable either at a definite time, or at a certain event, or only at an infinite distance of time, or a perpetual loan. In economics the symbol O denotes the present value of a sum of money that will only be paid at an infinite distance of time, and as the present value of any sum whatever, however large or however small, paid at an infinite distance of time, is exactly the same, i.e. 0, it shows that in economics, as in every other branch of physical science, one O may be any number of times greater than another O, which sometimes puzzles juvenile mathematicians. On the funds. 4. We observed in a former chapter that the state is a persona distinct from its individual citizens, consequently they can trade with it exactly in the same way as amongst themselves. When a government wants to raise a large sum of money at once to meet some great public requirement, as a war, or famine, or to construct some great public work, it borrows the principal sum, and in exchange for the principal it agrees to pay a fixed sum of interest forever. That is, in exchange for the principal sum it sells a perpetual annuity. This annuity, or right to demand this annual sum, was formerly called a rent, just as the right to receive an annuity for the use of lands, houses, mines, copyrights, and sea, is called a rent. The name rent has, however, been discontinued in English, though it was used so late as the time of Charles II, but it is retained in French, and this kind of annuity is called rents, and a fundholder is termed rentier. Turgot calls the moneyed interest l'interrentier. In English this annuity is termed the funds in popular language, because the capital sum is said to be funded or fixed. The legal name is bank annuities, because it is, like the first bank, the contribution of a number of persons. The government does not bind itself to repay the principal, though it reserves to itself the right to do so. It merely offers for sale a perpetual annuity, and if the annuitant wishes to get back his principal he must offer the annuity for sale to someone else. It must be carefully observed that the funds are not of the nature of a mortgage, as is sometimes supposed. In English law a mortgage is the actual sale of some specific thing, as a particular piece of land in exchange for a sum of money, with the right of repurchasing the land upon repaying the principal and interest. A mortgage deed is not credit, but the title deeds to a specific piece of land. But the funds are credit, they are mere abstract rights to be paid out of the income of the country. They are not titles to any specific things. This has a very important bearing when persons try to estimate the ratio of the national debt to the general wealth of the country. Sometimes an estimate is formed of the material wealth of the country, and the funds are compared with that. But this is a very erroneous way of considering the matter. The funds are a liability to pay about 28 million liters a year out of the general income of the country, and the true way of estimating the weight of the national debt is to compare this annuity with the annual income of the country, and by doing this it will be found that the weight of the debt is very much less than is supposed. The government, however, often agrees to pay off a certain amount of the principal by annual installments. In such cases these annuities are not called the funds, but terminable annuities. On tithes. 5. In ecclesiastical law, tithes are the right to demand the 10th part of the yearly increase from land, the stock upon land, and the personal industry of the people. Tithes of the increase of the land itself, such as corn, hay, hops, fruits of all sorts, are called predial tithes. Tithes of the increase of the stock upon the land, such as calves, pigs, lambs, poultry, eggs, butter, cheese, and sea, are called mixed tithes, and tithes of the profits of personal industry of all sorts, handicrafts, arts, and professions, are called personal tithes. Some persons may, perhaps, be surprised to hear that by law tithes are not only due from the owners of land, but also from the industry of every person in the country. Every great merchant, every advocate, every physician, every engineer, every artist, every author, every commercial enterprise, banks, railways, newspapers, insurance companies, are in reality by law bound to pay 1/10 of the yearly produce of their industry equally with the owners of land. Spelman says that in his day, in many parts of the country, servants paid tithes on their wages, but all these classes of persons have long ago emancipated themselves from this duty and kept them to themselves, and the landowners are the only class of the community who have continued to pay them. Up till 1836 tithes were demandable in kind, but they were then commuted into a rent charge, which varies according to the price of corn. Policies of insurance. 6. Another large class of incorporeal property is policies of insurance. As we have seen that a single sum of money may be paid down to buy an annuity, so equally an annuity may be paid to buy a single sum payable on some contingency, such as death, or attaining a certain age, or to indemnify losses by fire, shipwreck, or other accidents. This shows how an obligation may be capital. A policy is an obligation of the company, but it produces them a revenue, and hence it is capital to them. All these rights of obligation are called choses in action, because there is always some person who is bound to discharge them, and if he refuses to do so, an action will lie against him. On rights of expectation. 7. Rights of expectation differ from rights of obligation in this, that though the right is the same to receive the profits, yet no particular person is bound to make the payment, but it is only hoped or expected that someone will. This species of property, therefore, is not a chose in action, though it is sometimes erroneously included under that title. It is called in Roman law emptio spe, or emptio resprate. It is merely the right to an expected or hoped for profit, and hence it may be called a right of expectation. To this class of incorporeal property belong shares in commercial companies of all sorts, the goodwill of a business, the practice of a professional man, copyrights, patents, tolls, ferries, shootings and fisheries, street crossings. On shares in commercial companies. 8. A class of incorporeal property which has attained gigantic magnitude in modern times is shares in commercial companies of all sorts, banks, railways, steamships, gas, insurance, docks, and many others. The commercial enterprises of modern times are on such a gigantic scale that they can only be carried on by great associations of persons. These persons are formed into companies, and, as we have observed, the company is a persona distinct from its individual members. The individual members pay over their contributions to the company, and then lose all right to it, and they receive certificates entitling them to share in the profits made by trading in the proportion in which they have subscribed to the capital. These certificates are called shares. The members of a joint stock company are like the fund holders. They have no right to demand back their subscriptions from the company, but if they want their money, they can sell their shares in the open market. The value of the shares in no way depends upon the sum originally paid for them, but entirely on the income or profits made by the trading of the company, and of course the average rate of interest. If the profits made by the company fall short of the average rate of interest, the shares fall to a discount. If the profits made exceed the usual rate of interest, the shares may rise to an enormous premium. The most remarkable difference in value between the original capital paid in and the value of the shares probably that ever existed is the New River Water Company. When Sir Hugh Middleton and his sagacious CO adventurers in the reign of James I constructed this canal, so little were the blessings of pure water understood by the citizens of London that the patriotic projector was ruined and obliged to sell his shares. However, the work was at length effected, and the shares upon which 100 litres were paid originally sold in 1878 at the rate of 93, cool. The goodwill of a business. 9. Analogous to the shares in a commercial company, only that it is not recorded on paper and sold in the market, is the goodwill of a business. When a trader has established a reputation in any commercial way, the expectation of future profits is a valuable property, which he can sell and dispose of quite separate from the house or shop, or the goods actually in the shop. This property is fully recognized by courts of law as part of the fruits of accumulated industry, just as much as any material product. But, as it is always fixed to a particular place, it may be called incorporeal real property. We may cite an instance which may interest our readers. Boswell says that Johnson was appointed by Thrall, the great brewer, one of his executors. In that capacity it became his duty to sell the business. When the sale was going on, Johnson appeared, bustling about, with an inkhorn and pen in his buttonhole, like an exciseman, and on being asked what he really considered to be the value of the property which was to be disposed of, answered, "We are not here to sell a parcel of boilers and vats, but the potentiality of growing rich beyond their dreams of avarice." This latter phrase was merely Johnson's needs for the goodwill of the business. The price realized was 135,000 litres, and it was merely the right to the future profits of the business. When the great banking house of Jones, Lloyd, and Company sold their business to the London and Westminster Bank, it was said that the price given was 500,000 litres. In a similar way, every trading house in the country has a goodwill of more or less value, which is a saleable commodity like any material chattel. The practice of a professional man. 10. Another species of incorporeal property analogous to the goodwill of a business is the practice of a professional man. Not only do dealers in material products create a business by their industry and labor, which may be sold, but also dealers in immaterial products, such as medical men, solicitors, and do the same, and it is capable of being sold. This is called a practice. If a young doctor or solicitor wishes to start in business, it is very usual for him to buy a practice, and of course such a purchase is capital. On copyrights. 11. Another species of incorporeal property of constantly increasing magnitude is copyright, or the right to the profits to be made by the sale of works of literature and art, or the property in ideas. When an author publishes a successful work, the right of multiplying copies of it and of receiving the profits from so doing is a valuable property, termed copyright. Not only does this extend to the actual works so published, but also to the names of periodicals. Suppose that anyone were to conceive the audacious idea of buying up the Times newspaper. What would its price comprehend? Would it be merely the brick buildings, the steam engines, the presses, and the types, which may be seen and handled? The price of these things would be utterly insignificant. The fact is that by the energy and skill with which the Times has been conducted, it has established an enormous demand for it, and as innumerable people require to make their wants known, they go to the Times to advertise in it. These advertisements produce an annual revenue whose value can be approximately estimated, and the value of the Times is the value of that expectation or potentiality of future profits. There is not only copyright in actual material publications, but also in dramatic representations and things of that nature. It was stated that the copyright in a popular song, Slap, Bang, Here We Are Again, sold for 2,000 litres. On patents. 12. Another form of property in ideas is a patent, which is a right granted by letters patent from the Crown for the exclusive sale of some mechanical invention. We may observe that no one can have a patent for a principle, but only for some particular application of it. That is, no one can have a patent for a discovery, but only for an invention. As soon as a general scientific principle is discovered, it becomes universal property, and private persons can appropriate some particular application of it to practical use. Advowsons and benefices. 13. Another form of incorporeal property is the right to receive the ecclesiastical dues in some locality for performing religious services. This right is called a benefice, and the right to nominate the person to these benefices is called an advowson. Tolls and ferries. 14. Tolls and ferries are the right to demand compensation for establishing roads, ferries, docks, and sea shootings and fishings. 15. Another species of incorporeal property which has increased very much in magnitude in recent years are shootings and fishings. These are not the rights to any particular birds or any particular fish, but the right of shooting at birds and killing them if the sportsman can, and the right of trying to catch fish. Street crossings. 16. We may mention as a last species of incorporeal property street crossings. These are made the subject of regular property by the poorer classes, just as much as landed estates, and they are bequeathed from one to the other and are made the subject of marriage portions. There cannot be a more striking example of the MCO spay than these street crossings, as no one is bound to pay toll for them. Their receipts depend purely upon the charitable feelings of the passengers, and yet they are capital to their occupiers.